So I think, although this didn't work yesterday, I think I'm also recording, which will be really helpful for the people who come in later. So I'm going to spend about 15 minutes on this,
Yeah.
and then we'll switch.
Okay,
to
can you
the,
send
switch
me?
to the formal lecture.
He's got that on screen share at a second.
Can you see the problem jostle on knowledge management in a kind of purple screen?
Yeah.
Fantastic.
On the screen, yeah.
And I'm projecting that from my screen. If you want to, you can go into the same version on your screen as well, so that, and it's a bit easier to read in there. Great. Now, why on earth is Charlie getting us to do this? And in the middle of trying to learn HRM and managing people. I'm doing it because lots of companies now have already moved. In fact, the company I work for, British Airways, moved about 15 years ago onto trying to do file sharing in an intranet, so sharing files between people so that we could work on them together, so that when someone had solved a particular technical problem or sales problem, they could share that. So it started to build up a huge database of what we call a knowledge management base, and it meant that we had Word documents at that stage that we could all pop back into at any time. They were all stored on an intranet, which Microsoft are now given the fancy name of OneDrive. And that's in particular at the university, it's all stored at the moment here down in the Babbage building, in a secret server in the basement somewhere, perhaps. And so what I want to do is to look at how companies spread this out over about 3 weeks and look at a piece of software as an example for us trying to share knowledge management as we work between being individuals and then move towards working more collaboratively and cooperatively. And so we're doing, it's a bit postmodern or a bit meta. We're doing it as well as studying it. And I wanted to use something really new from Microsoft, their package called OneNote, that's been around a few years, but they've had a re-engineering of it and tried to make it a little bit closer to being a tool that could be used not just for collaboration, but to be stored for knowledge management. In the past, and I use this a lot, and you'll see down in the way I've typed in, I've pretended to be, I am one of the group. So I've said, hello, my name is Charlie down there, about halfway down the screen. And I've put what my experience is of knowledge management and collaboration tools. So knowledge management is being able to store solutions to problems as they happen. So when someone's in a slightly panicky situation and trying to fix something for a customer or fix something across the organization for another member of staff, that's when we're meant to be at our most alert, and that's when we have our best thoughts to solve a problem. A lot of companies have called them FAQs, facts, frequently asked questions. It translates nicely into French, actually. It's foire aux questions, like a fairground of questions. When we're having the most fun, that's when we can answer questions best, when we're put on the spot. And then if we can capture those answers at that moment, or we elicit those answers with an E, elicit them, and put them in and share them, that's when they're going to be most valuable, a great knowledge base that we're building up for our co-workers. And in my module, about halfway through, as soon as you've done the first assessment, I want us then to shift to be co-workers, where we're working as a team, trying to support each other. I've talked a lot over the last few days. So in my past, I've used Google Sites and Google Docs as a knowledge management system, probably for about 6 or 7 years. It's really robust now. It's got that really nice advantage to it, is that when you're all in Docs together, in the same way that we're now all in OneNote together, is it means as you type, someone can interrupt and go in and go into your typing and type in there at the same time. I've been talking to people, our really good support people here at the university, and Alistair in particular this morning said there's a way that you can improve it. Not Alistair, but JC. JC has said there's a way we can improve this, and that's if we all want to say something quite formally to each other, that is to put the conversation into a table like this. And just in the last 4 minutes or so, 11 minutes, he has been into this and restructured all this for us. So I can, in my little block here, I can say, thank you for the new table structure below. And you see, as you type live in there, if I make typos, it leaves them in, but I can fix them. And the way I've used Google Docs before for several years is that people type, and we have what we call a problem jostle in there. In fact, I last used this on a summer school back in June, July this year. And the whole team, the whole learning group were all in there together, and we did a problem jostle and looked at each other's texts and did work in them and moved around. It seems that OneNote isn't quite as agile as that. And so if we want to say things formally, and the support people have looked after us this morning, put those all into a table there. So you could jump into a section in the table and put your comments in there like that. Now, to make it more difficult and to be more of a challenge and to be more valuable to us in the MSc group, somewhere else in there on one of the other tabs, the tabs are also called pages in OneNote. We're in a notebook at the moment called Narrative Knowledge. We're on one page in that notebook called Problem Jostle or Knowledge Management. And this is where we'll work and meet and leave messages for each other and jostle in here, jostle those problems. But somewhere else along there called Track PowerPoints with the K in a pair of parentheses, Track PowerPoints. That's where I've got a first year group of tourism management students. And in there, we're all trying to share a PowerPoint about tourism sites in Plymouth or in our hometown. So I'm deliberately doing this because it makes this more complicated and more demanding. But our role in it, in HTM 701, is to work in here for about 3 sessions, 3 weeks, and dip into here when you're feeling a bit fed up on a Saturday and have a look in here. And to then I'll start to pose problem questions in here and we'll jostle them together. Questions about whether an intranet or an extranet is a good way to work with colleagues, whether it's a good way to work across a big company. Some people are in China, which in our example they will be, and some people will be in Britain in the company that you're working on, and whether it works in a live way. So can we jostle in there together in a live way, and does that generate new knowledge that we can later go back, grab and quarry or mine, and then put into our essays, or if we were in a real company, use to solve problems in our real company organization. So it might be that the social media staff in our travel company aren't aware of what's going on on the tour here in Plymouth or in Torquay, and by doing a problem jostle, we can share some of the problems that are going on that need solving through this medium, through a knowledge management and collaboration tool like this. The only other one that I've played with a little bit, I've read about Slack channels, and one of my master students last year, she used it in her company. She was employed full-time, but she also did the master's degree while secretly, not secretly because her employer was helping her, but she was doing that part-time, so she was working really hard. And perhaps 1 or 2 of you are doing that, working and doing the masters. And she used Slack channels in her company, and she was really good. She told us a little bit about that. It looked really interesting. It's quite expensive, but then OneNote is quite expensive. We can have access to it because the university have bought it for us to use for free in here. So that's just a briefing. Over the next day or two, please pop in there. We've even got the first year's names in there, which shouldn't really be in there, but that's part of what I'm trying to do with this, is that when you're trying to work collaboratively, often the collaborations seep a little bit. There's a bit of osmosis goes on. And we need a whole new vocabulary to talk about the leakiness of a shared collaboration tool. So find your name, or if it isn't in, put your name in a cell in the table and write something about any other collaboration or knowledge management tool that you've read about or actually really used, and then pop that in your table there. Enough of that. I see that other people have begun to join us, so we'll flip now. I'll stop sharing that screen and we'll go to the formal lecture. Luckily, it looks like it did record all that, so anyone arriving late, or if you want to review that in an hour or two's time, I'll be able to save that onto Panopto and you can have a look at that again and try and... It's complicated and messy, but that's part of the fun of what we're trying to achieve, so we can reflect on that over the next 2 to 3 weeks, and I'll return to it and make it more clear, and then we'll run a definite session in there that will make a lot more sense to you in a couple of weeks' time. Right, the formal lecture, we'll switch now. I'll do that for quite a while, because there's a whole new piece of HR management and leadership that I want to explain today. The slides that I'm using for that are called, they're on the DLE, and they're called, where's the DLE? They're called DSDM Atern Project Management, and management is spelled just MGT. Looks completely strange, and it's a PowerPoint. DSDM Atern Project Management, but I'll do a screen share and bring it up on the screen, so I'll talk through it as we're on the screen at the same time. Still recording. Good. Screen share. There's the code again for anyone who's joined late who still needs the code, and I'll leave that pasted on there. I'm going to try and go into full project so the screen's a decent size, a more readable size. Doesn't always work. Has that worked for people? Can they see full screen now? Great. Thanks, guys. And is my volume and voice okay as well? Great, thank you, thanks. So we're going to look today at project management, the Agile enterprise, using something called DSDM Atern, which is the Dynamic Systems Development Method. The Agile enterprise is a company that's able to form A-grade teams that can quickly complete new developments, then dissolve that team and reform another. The Arctic tern, this bird, symbolizes agility, and it's now used as a name for DSDM Atern, which is an approach to project management. When I've used it in business, we used it at British Airways, and I'll keep referring back to that example as a case study all the way through. We used it because other big blue chip companies used it, IBM, and we did a lot of work with IBM. One of our suppliers for equipment, onboard equipment for the planes, used DSDM as a method for teams to be able to work together and for them to take on different roles. You may be a computer programmer, we'll call them developers nowadays, a web developer, but we might need you in the team to take on a different role. You might need to be a leader, or you might need to be a systems tester. So you might need to take on a slightly different role when we've formed an Agile or a DSDM team. And in that team too, often there are employees from other companies, your collaborating companies. And this works really well for your model of the assessment that you're working on, because one of the companies I'm asking you to collaborate with is the railway company. If you're bringing your customers from Paris or London into Plymouth or Torquay, and some of you too will choose to collaborate with the airline as well. You won't collaborate with the hotel because your company has bought the hotel in Plymouth or Torquay or wherever you've decided to buy your hotel in the southwest. But sometimes and some companies you definitely will be collaborating with deliberately. So in the imaginary scenario, your two companies will be DSDM trained. It's quite a long process to train an organization and an individual employee in DSDM Atern. And that's what we're going to look at today and why it's so useful if people are all trained up in big companies. It's a great thing to learn as well, because if you go to work for a big company, lots of the big software companies and lots of the big all of the big airlines that I know use DSDM Atern to start new projects. A new project might be that you've decided to launch a new tourism product, but you're a hotel company. So that would be a DSDM Atern type project. Or it might be something really small, a new project to just write a new app or start selling in a new region. But you might decide that you're going to start selling in Hong Kong, and you haven't sold your product in Hong Kong before. You've stayed in mainland China. DSDM has developed, you see that the handbook I'm referring to is 10 or 12 years old, but people have continued to develop it and kept all the materials for it fairly free and cheap, and at least all the slides for it completely free. Training companies can take it on board and then offer training courses in it, and they can make a profit by training other companies in it. But the materials for it, they try and keep them as low cost or as free as possible, so that not only blue chip companies use it, but small software companies or startup companies. Say if you're a social media content authoring company, you could use it. So you were up to speed with it, even though you might be a one person freelance company, you could still use it. The idea of DSDM Atern is that it formalizes project roles for the duration of the project. So although you might be the captain of a jumbo jet, it gives you a chance to park your ego like a jumbo jet there, or actually that's an Airbus A350, a huge aeroplane. And you can see the photograph I've managed to find there was that we had to cut a hole in the door in order to park that. And it's quite a nice metaphor for if someone who's quite a senior and responsible person in charge of a lot of people's lives, for the time that they're in the project, the formal project role that they take on allows them to park that super responsibility, their ego, as we sometimes call it in a light-hearted way, whilst they're doing the project. Because on that project, they might be just a tester, or they might be the customer representative, or just a user. So they're not being the captain whilst they're on the project. So it formalizes project roles, and there's a whole array of these. These slides aren't a training course. It's a way of giving you a taste and an overview of DSDM to see how it might work in your organization, that you might decide to spec it when you do it in your project. The team is sustainable because each person uses their skills in their role in the project. Sustainable here means that the project will be completed. The team is formed to solve one project or one problem, then dissolved. So in a way, when we were introducing and looking at OneNote about 15 minutes ago, we form and go into a team in OneNote to solve a particular problem. The problem might be, our knowledge management systems really fit for purpose yet? And then try and solve it, and then dissolve the team. And while we're in the team and in that project, we have got a more equal role. What DSDM Atern proposes is that we've got this whole array of roles that it normally draws in this figure of 8 shape. We have a business sponsor, we have a project manager, we have a team leader connected to the project manager, and the team leader is usually the technical team leader that looks after the main people who are going to solve the problem. So the problem might be, let's develop a new app to sell in Hong Kong. So it has to be written in Cantonese. So the team leader would recruit Cantonese translators and Apple iOS developers to write the app, and that technical team would report into her, the team leader there. Slightly different, you see, from the project manager, whom she reports up to, and the project manager is in touch with the customers too, the technical coordinator, the business visionary who wants the app to work, and the business sponsor who's paying for this project, either paying for it internally, or if it's across 2 or 3 companies, actually finding some real cash to pay for it, to pay for people's time. The little scenario that I've imagined that would fit well with the project that you're doing is based on a seaside town, and I've based it on the seaside town of Roscoff, because if we ever get out of lockdown, and the ferries have started running again between Plymouth and Roscoff. You can only go by car at the moment, but as soon as they let foot passengers on again, it's a really nice trip to pop across from Plymouth to Roscoff on the ferry. So it's to tempt you to go over on that trip sometime. And in that seaside town, there's an old French restaurant and hotel called the Hotel Bellevue, that's very close to the ferry terminal, and also the photograph I've taken of it here, it looks out onto the seafront, onto the harbour. Many years ago, as you can see from the photograph, and this is quite a new photograph, it's only about 2 or 3 years old, but many years ago it did a makeover because more English tourists were arriving in Roscoff, and rather than driving through, they were arriving as foot passengers, and they were staying in Roscoff. So they wanted to make English visitors seem welcome, and so they found this word pub. It doesn't really mean anything. In fact, actually, it means advert in French, from publicité. But they found this English word pub that they believe means a lot to English visitors, and they rebranded the Hotel Bellevue as something called a pub. And it worked. It attracted lots of passers-by, people who were walking into town from the ferry terminal. They would stop in for a drink. Now, though, the imaginary project is that the seaside town of Roscoff has won a bid to host Russian delegates for a major international event. So lots of Russian visitors will be arriving in town. So the hotel, the Bellevue, which is still themed to attract the British day trippers with a mock British pub, now plans and wants to manage the theme and upgrade itself to a high-end and quality key venue for the Russian delegation. The Russian delegation will be on business rates. They won't be holidaymakers paying for themselves. Their business will be paying for them. So it's a different grade and a different scale. I think we call it MICE, the conferences. I can't remember the first word of MICE. Can anyone think of what MICE stands for? Conferences, sales, promotion. When businesses send their people to do work and go to conferences and go to meetings, incentive and conference travel. So we're changing the theme, and the project is to change the theme. So it needs a makeover for the Russian delegation. That's a typical kind of project that's very close to your project that you're doing. What DSDM does, it gives us what seems a simple timeline when we start at the end with that big red bar at the end. Can everyone see that quite clearly on the screen? Can you give me a nod if that's... Great, thanks guys, thanks. Sometimes it goes off the screen into the little picture in pictures, but that seems nice and clear. So we start with that red bar, that red box called the delivery deadline, and we say the Russian delegation are going to arrive on February the 1st, 2021. So we can't overshoot that. If we're still doing something on that date, then we've blown it, we've lost it, it's not going to work. So we start with that date and then draw these time boxes backwards from that. The nearest time box to the delivery deadline is the deployment. So when we can finally say go and switch the lights on, or set the table for the first meal when all of the delegates arrive. So that's a deployment moment, and that's a time box of its own. And then these time boxes sit backwards across the slide, go into the left-hand side of the screen. We build time boxes backwards behind that. Sometimes some time boxes will not be dependent on others, and so they'll sit in a separate row on the screen. I've got a longer time box that takes a couple of weeks to achieve, but it's not dependent on any of the others. And down there overall is a project timeline, and that's the days and weeks ticking away to the February the 1st deadline. The first component of DSDM is to maintain quality, and the first component of DSDM in order to maintain quality throughout is this concept called time boxing, and that's trying to split the project up into doable chunks that we can complete and sign off, and we can take them upstairs and say to the customer representative who's running the project, we've finished this, we've finished putting new card key locks on all the hotel room doors, can you check them, and are you happy with them? And then we can sign off and tick that time box. Inside a time box, this is a zoom in onto one of the time boxes, the pale blue time boxes from that previous slide. I've gone into highlight and expand it. And it has little codes all around it, a little icon in the middle, a small icon to show who the resource is, a requirement name, and a little bit jokey, but I'm trying to show how small to what kind of fine detail we might go in time boxing is we've said that although we use white napkins at the moment in the hotel restaurant as a kind of nod to the Russians, we want now nice folded red napkins around the table. So a nice small, almost jokey idea that we want to achieve, and that could go in one time box. We'll give the time box an ID. It's going to let me do these. So we give it an ID up there. Has that drawn a nice little red balloon around it? Oh, this is getting sophisticated now. And the ID helps us on spreadsheets or when we're talking to other members of the team to give the time box a name. And also if we find that there are any dependencies that we can't make, we can't fold the red napkins if it's dependent on buying the red napkins. So we might say that there's another time box that someone's got to go and buy these napkins before we can learn how to fold them, for example. Excuse me. And that dependency would refer back to an ID for an older time box there. We're going to give it a simple name so we can always talk about it in meetings. It's the requirement of what we're trying to achieve. It is red napkins. The resource, who is going to do it, and we've talked about human resource management, and this is where we use the word resource, meaning a trained employee who feels confident and capable of doing that job. We say how much it's going to cost in terms of time and money, time and dollars or pounds, and then this one of the secret ingredients of DSDM is we give it a Moscow code, and we'll talk about that in a moment. So that's what a time box looks like if we drill down into it and unfolded it and looked at it inside. Going deeper down into prioritizing doing a time box, we give each time box a Moscow rules code. So with the red napkins, we'd have a meeting where we end up with all the requirements. There may be 30 or 40 requirements for a typical project. We've got to get the key codes to work. We've got to put some new doors on. We've got to take that pub sign down off the wall because it looks awful now, 20 years on. So each of those would be a time box. And then we have all the time box on time box cards. Some people use post-it notes, giant post-it notes, and have a face-to-face meeting with all the project stakeholders in the room together. And then we prioritize them with these 4 levels of prioritization. One is a must-have objective. The second level of priority is a should-have. The third level is could-have. And then this 4th one is won't have till later. Some of these that in the won't have till later might never appear. And I would suggest that perhaps the red napkins will be prioritized way down at the bottom as won't have till later. We'd perhaps call them a nice to have, so that if everything else has worked out and we're on time for everything else, then we can look at the W's of the word Moscow, the won't haves, and start to implement some of them. So we'd give that a W code or a WO code. And Moscowing or prioritizing is the secret to achieving the must-haves and most of the should-haves on time, on quality, and on budget, which is what we're trying to achieve. So it has 5 key techniques overall, the project method does, management method does. It has this Moscow prioritization. So we end up with the 30 or 40 time boxes that we're going to achieve, like red napkins, new key codes, take that pub sign down. All is time boxed and they're prioritized with an M, S, C or W code. We do modeling to say what it might look like. And this morning, before we started the formal lecture, we had a little model. We looked at the OneNote of how it might look when we're really using it next week or the following week. So we've been in and modeled a little bit. And this is a perfect process from DSDM. It's let's have a little look, see if what it looks like almost in practice, and try it a little bit. Not test it, but let's just have a little dabble in there, and that's modeling. Sometimes people show off apps before they're ready on the phone. Say, what if this new game did this? Would you like this? You have facilitated workshops, so you get together in groups and argue and thrash out what's going to happen, but they're run by a facilitator, somebody who's trained and experienced in DSDM. And often big companies have a facilitator, or if it's a small company, you can book one and buy one in for the day. You have iterative development, so you do a bit, you model it, you make sure that works, and then you say, right, we'll sign that part off. We know that page works, we'll run with that, and then we'll start the next one. So something to show your client and your user, sign it off, and then go on to the next one. And finally, time boxing, which helps us to stay on time, but with quality. Everyone usually stays on time. Imagine you trying to write an essay and hand it in. You're probably going to hand it in on time, but sometimes if you leave it till midnight on the day before you're going to submit it, the quality suffers a little bit. And this is what DSDM tries to do. It tries to say, for the time boxes that we've given an M to, the quality is always going to be the best we can possibly do. When we've run those facilitated workshops that I mentioned with a facilitator, they're formed of groups of 4 or 5 people, which will be the facilitator, who often acts as the reporter as well. So this is a person who knows DSDM, but doesn't really know the project that well, but they're going to keep the agenda going, like a maître d' in a restaurant, or an MC, a master of ceremonies at a rave. and they keep things going and put the next record on. They also report and write up the meeting and say what was agreed. In this particular scenario, where we're trying to prepare the old hotel and do a makeover for the Russian delegation, I would have the hotel manager there. I would have someone with technical ideas, so someone who's from the hotel and catering industry and works in the hotel. Logistics ideas. So we may buy someone in, or may have someone from the team, and finally the project leader, who might be, say, a senior member of staff, say from the restaurant team. Each of them might propose one or two new ideas for the Russian makeover. So you would start to come up with all of these ideas in the workshop. Russian food, translated menus, have some language staff, so have some employees that are Russian for the week or the 2 weeks that the Russian delegation are there. Perhaps do a makeover of the rooms and theme them, have some photographs of Moscow and St. Petersburg, and put some nice photographs in the room. Business support staff, so bring in some people who've got Russian dictation skills. Obviously make sure there's great Wi-Fi, and perhaps clean out one of the storage rooms and turn it into a conference room as well. So quite a big job to refit a storage room into a conference room. From our own point of view and from your project, you've got to imagine that service environment and the service experience going all the way through. And this nicely relates to your project that you're working on. So what does it feel like for a Chinese tourist to arrive in Plymouth or Torquay from check-in through to the hotel room and then back down again for dining that evening, or if the first meal they have in the hotel is going to be the breakfast next day? So walk through that in your mind, imagining the service environment and the service experience. Mary Jo Bittner is a great reference on service experience and service environment. We talked too about iterative development within a time box. So again, I'm drilling down inside a time box here. We kick off a time box. We formally say it started. So for our OneNote project, that formally started back at 10:59 a.m. this morning at the beginning of this project, at the beginning of this lecture. We kicked off a new time box. We investigated, we refined, and we consolidated, and we brought in some skilled technical help to refine the way that we were going to type in that OneNote. And then we're going to consolidate that. And then we either sign off, or sometimes it's called close out in DSDM language. We'd close out and say that time box is finished. So at the end of this lecture, we might pop back into OneNote and have a quick glance in there and say, right, we've closed out on this, we've done that. So we make it a little bit ritual to say that we do know that we've done this time box, and the project leader would say, yes, that time box was finished. Otherwise, we don't know that we've done them unless we're a little bit ceremonial about them. There's this iteration in a really simple slide, is that it's plan, evolve, review, identify anything that's not worked or needs more quality, then plan how we're going to do it, evolve, review, identify. So that's iteration, working around and around each time. At some stage, someone's got to decide the quality is enough for this, and we can close that one out. No need to spend any more time on that. It's good enough for what we want. We need, though, people trained to become resources. So as we're doing this, we're all at different stages with learning. Let's go back to the OneNote example. I keep mixing the two case studies up, but we're all at different stages about how comfortable we feel in OneNote. And we're not really resources unless you've used OneNote seriously before. And so everyone's at a different stage, and we're not all fully trained in using OneNote. We've also got to make sure that the process is well established and understood in one of the objectives, and that the technology is there and working. And my example for this was saying opening a new e-commerce channel to mobile customers. So perhaps we're going to try and sell the tickets on iPhone, and so that might be a project. And we'd have to ask the question, are people, process and technology all ready for those? DSDM Atern's got 8 principles. It focuses on the business need. It delivers on time. It collaborates to use all the team's skills. It never compromises on quality. It builds incrementally from firm foundations, and it does that by developing iteratively. It communicates continuously and clearly in all languages of a team group. And this is why I'm trying to experiment over the next few weeks with OneNote, because that might be a perfect place for knowledge management where we're communicating continuously. So although the meetings, the lectures might be live for an hour or so, we need a place and a space where employees or students can go back and say, I just want to ask this question amongst my team. And finally, demonstrate control as a project leader. And project leaders are usually really well paid. It's really an excellent job if you go to work in a big company, and you have to learn how to use charts, timetables, take feedback and give feedback. And that's my old idea way back from the first slides, the first lecture of control. Control isn't command, control is feedback. One of the 8 principles of DSDM is to deliver on time, a calm, professional delivery on time, but never compromising on quality. So if you are slipping on the project, what can give? How do you reduce pressure as the project leader or the project manager? And I'll leave you to go and have a look at some of the resources for DSDM for that. Just stop the share and I'll stop the recording there.